Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. Hands-on apologetics. Well, starting in apologetics years ago. Welcome back, everybody. We used to run into questions that were pretty obscure. Petros Petra. Does Jesus really call Peter rock? Why was Pope Honorius condemned? Things like that. But times have changed, and objections have changed over time. And so there are objections out there that are very different, but nonetheless, somewhat difficult to explain simply and clearly. So to kind of go through some of these most common questions that are out there today, we have Master Apologist Bryan Mercier on. Bryan is a professional Catholic speaker, a retreat leader, author, and Catholic apologist. He's spoken at countless teen and adults over 20 years through confirmation retreats, parish missions, keynote talks, Catholic school retreats, seminars, workshops, the list goes on and on. He's been on all sorts of Catholic media outlets, including EWTN. And he's also been on Hands-on Apologetics. So welcome back, Bryan, to the show.
Thank you very much. Always glad to be here.
Yeah, well, it's always a thrill to have you because you have so much experience, like field experience for I think especially youth, but I'm sure young adults or just regular adult Catholics. But you're in the field working, so you hear all the latest and greatest objections to Catholicism. Maybe you could fill us in a little bit on, where do you hear these objections? Is it through emails? Is it through retreats? Or, where did they come from?
That is a good question. I speak to both teens and I speak to young adults a lot, but I also speak to adults as well. So I hear these objections everywhere, and I'm always having different conversations in different places that I go, from the gym or, taking a walk and running into somebody. Conversations just start. But I hear them constantly by teens and young adults, millennials, when I give retreats. I also hear them when I work at different places, like in my school cafeteria. When I was a teacher, I used to hear these objections all the time. I hear them from fallen away Catholics and friends and family who have left the church, or just who are dissatisfied with the church, who don't understand their faith very well. And sometimes I even hear them from other religions. And definitely on YouTube, social media, you hear these constantly.
Yeah. Is there much of an overlap? I mean, you've been in the field, about as long as I have, maybe, thereabouts. Do the objections today that you run into, say, people my age, is it different from the people who are in their 20s?
I would say so. I would say that the people who are generally on the older side have more of a lackadaisical view. It's more like they just don't care, and they don't think that they need to go to church, and they don't need to follow all the rules. Whereas younger kids, a lot of the issues are moral issues. A lot of the issues that they struggle with are things that they'll hear in their public schools, or they'll hear from their friends, or they'll see on primetime TV. I mean, countless objections and sex before marriage and all of these other things that we see on TV. It's everywhere. They're bombarded with it. How in the world, if good Catholics oftentimes don't know what the truth is, how are non-Catholics or people who are skeptical supposed to know what the truth is? So, I mean, there is overlap, but it definitely varies.
Yeah, that's a really good point, too. It's always scary when Catholics go to secular media or non-Catholics to find out what the church teaches, isn't it?
And just so your audience knows, I had recommended this topic because, as you said, back in the day, I've been doing this for so long. And back in the day, I used to talk about, why do Catholics worship Mary? Why do Catholics believe in the Pope? Why do you let an old man in Rome boss you around? All you need is the Bible. Where is purgatory found in the Bible? I grew up, defending the Catholic faith from a lot of different religions on these topics. And you still hear them from time to time. But in reality, the times have changed, as you said at the beginning of the show, Gary. I mean, the things that we hear now, and I'll give you one in a second, but just to give our audience a deeper understanding, if you don't mind, the deeper things we hear now are, the Catholic Church is too rich. The Catholic Church has too many rules to follow. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I don't think you have to do this. I don't think I have to do this. And all of a sudden, we've made ourselves Pope. We've made ourselves God, because we think that we can redefine the laws of God just because we think it's okay. And that's problematic to begin with. So just at the very outset, I kind of want to establish the fact that, well, it's a simple point, but we're not God. We're not God. And there's a Camp Veritas. They have a slogan. It's a Catholic camp. And they say their slogan is, there is a God, but I'm not him. In other words, we don't make up the rules. God already gave us the law. And a lot of times the Catholic Church comes under a bad rap for having too many rules or being too overbearing or being behind the times, when in reality, these are God's rules that he already established. And the Catholic Church is one of the very few people on earth still upholding his laws. And even if we wanted to change the laws, we can't, because you can't change what God said. We don't have more authority than God, and God, through Jesus Christ, gave all of his authority to the Catholic Church. And the Bible even says that when you listen to the church, you listen to God. And when you reject the church, you reject God. So I think that's an important premise when we start talking about these. Where does the truth come from? Does it come from God, or does it come from ourselves?
Wow, that's a really good point, because you're right. Older apologetics, it was always like, I have an authority and the church doesn't square with that authority, But in this case, it's more like the church teaches this. I don't know whether or not I accept that, So it isn't like they're appealing to a high authority. It's more they're appealing to themselves. What you did was basically just laid out basic catechesis in a way. If you assume that they believe in the existence of God and that Jesus is God and Lord, it just kind of unfolds from that, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. It does. And if look at the claims of all the other people on earth that claim to be, let's say, the Church of Jesus Christ, like the Mormons, they claim to be the true Church of Jesus. So you maybe have to investigate them. But the Jehovah's Witnesses claim to be the only true Church of Jesus. The actual Church of Christ claims to be the one true Church of Jesus because they're named the Church of Christ. And in fact, Mormons say the same thing, as do the Church of God. Fundamentalist Baptists claim to go back to John the Baptist. So I individually looked up each and every one of these religions to see if they were true and to see if they had any truth in them. But the fact is, Jesus started his church 2,000 plus years ago. He didn't start it in 1879 with an 18-year-old boy in New York, Joseph Smith. And the Mormons were not founded, just a couple hundred years ago. That's not Jesus's church. Jesus's church started 2,000 years ago. Same thing with the Jehovah's Witnesses, who started in 1872 with an 18-year-old boy, Charles Taze Russell. Same thing with the Church of God and Seventh-day Adventists. Ellen Gould actually claimed to have a revelation from Jesus, so the Seventh-day Adventists believe that their church is true. But all of these churches say the same thing. We're clearly not 2,000 years old. We clearly weren't started by Jesus, so we have to come up with this apostasy theory where the early church became corrupt and died out, and then it needed to be restored and resurrected much later. And that's what Seventh-day Adventists claim, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and all these other religions who all claim the same thing. But the fact is, Jesus said the gates of hell will never prevail against his church, and he would be with his church until the end of time. Great point. Great point. Because if you say, hey, I'm restoring the church, obviously that means that the church has failed. The gates of hell has prevailed against the original church, which, of course, is against what Jesus said. Beautiful. Well, hey, another thing, and this, I think it's more of internet. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if it's really become popular, is this idea of like, how do we know that Jesus even existed? That is a new, that argument used to be just on the fringe. There was this video called Zeitgeist, and it was actually kind of funny. It was so bad, but historically speaking, but my friend and I, he's also an apologist, and we watched it together and we're just getting a good kick out of it. But the bottom line is only very fringe extremists used to believe that Jesus didn't exist. But now the more unreligious we get and the more unstudied we become and the more we don't actually study history and we don't study the Bible or anything else, we just assume it's possible Jesus didn't exist. And why in the world wouldn't we want Jesus to exist? Well, because he's a threat. If Jesus exists, we actually there's a heaven and there's a hell. There's rules. There's a way, and there's a right and a wrong, and we have to follow it. The easiest way to get around that is to say, well, I don't think he exists. And if that's the lazy intellectual way out. But the bottom line is that Jesus does exist. And all online, people all the time say, how do you even know Jesus existed? And I always respond, oh, let me think. Every single encyclopedia, historian, and history book, all down through the last 2,000 years, they all claim that Jesus Christ exists. I was like, do you know more than all the historians throughout history? Is there something you know that all the history books don't?